She's Katy Montgomery. He's Justin Joseph. These best friends are serving subpoenas to bad advice weekly with Wrong Way Forward. Now, here's Katy and Justin.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Wrong Way Forward. I'm Justin Joseph here along with my best friend, Katy Montgomery. This week, if you've been following us over the past couple of shows, we're talking about something that kind of popped its head up over the last couple of shows on the right and wrong way to apologize. And Katy, do you even remember what episode we were doing when we were talking about this? I don't offhand.
I don't offhand either, but I think it has come up multiple times. And I know that you've kind of always mentioned we should do a show on this. And so we have finally grabbed the bull by the horns and decided we're going to tell you the wrong way forward to apologize, the wrong way forward to actually accept an apology, and maybe even talk about when it's okay to not accept that apology. So we're going to walk through kind of all those scenarios today.
And I think there's a good topical jumping off point. I don't know if anybody's following. I mean, I obviously follow Oprah, but this week Oprah sat down with the woman who was pictured in the cold cam kiss cam. Everybody remembers this was, it was probably 6 months ago. The woman was there with her boss, Chris Martin of Coldplay, pans the audience, and they catch them in an embrace. The people panic. Does everybody remember this?
We covered it on a show, Justin.
We did, and we both agreed that it was just wrong all around. Well, the woman is now speaking publicly to Oprah. She sat down on Oprah's podcast this week, and basically she's on her apology tour. Now, she says this is the one and only interview she's doing, and I think depending on your perspective, you will see her in a light depending on how you look at these types of things, if that makes sense. I looked at her and I wanted to come through the camera. I think she's annoying as hell.
Well, Justin, I do want to state that I love that this is her one and only interview. Maybe it's her only one-on-one video interview, but she did do an exclusive with the New York Times. So,
she did. I didn't know that.
Yeah, she's shopping around. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So let's listen to what she tells Oprah this week about that viral moment, and then we'll come back on the other side and talk about it.
You kept saying, I made a mistake. It was a mistake. I shouldn't have been out with my boss, but it wasn't a mistake that I deserved to die for.
Correct.
It wasn't a mistake that I deserved to have people coming up to me on the street and saying I should die because of it. It wasn't a mistake that deserved people threatening me and threatening my children. It was a mistake. So that's what you told me.
That's right.
Do you still feel that
Absolutely.
It was a mistake?
Absolutely. You know, I've been telling anyone that will listen, you know, I own the poor decision that I made in that moment. And I've paid an unimaginable price for that.
Yeah.
I also, you know, that was why I chose to leave my job.
I think that gives you the flavor of what she's talking about there. She says she's paid an unimaginable price. And again, you know, in researching for this show, I went back and looked at some of her apologies. And it's fascinating because some people thought this was enough. And some women who have been on the other side of the kiss cam thought that this apology was completely hollow.
Well, I mean, what do you think, Justin? What's your take on it? I mean, you said you find her very annoying, so I'm thinking you're not going to see this in a positive light.
Well, I have to say, you know, there are some people that are just off-putting, and I may be one of those people to want to be.
Good self-awareness, Justin.
Yeah, but she just is off-putting. I mean, she is if you listen, I listen to the more of the show, and what she says is she started this basically high-tech startup with this man. They were in the trenches together building this company. Obviously, sparks tend to fly when you're in those high impact environments. She said that, you know, that's kind of what gave it the precipice to all of this. She also says both of them were in troubled marriages. They were all separated, et cetera, et cetera. But my point is she's a smart, accomplished woman. And so to just say she was caught up in this, I think is not only the wrong way forward, but it rings hollow.
Well, I think this is really interesting is what is the intention of the apology, right? So she's saying, I made a mistake. And so is the intention of the apology to say, leave me alone? Is the intention of the apology to say, let's put an end to this? It is interesting, like this is becoming old news, but going on Oprah's podcast, and I'm assuming Oprah has millions upon millions of followers, and so this is going to be duplicated on her social media channels. It's coming back to light. It's still staying relevant. So I would be really interested to know what was the intention of this apology. Was it to actually apologize? Was it to say, leave me alone? Was it to make a comment about how women and men are treated differently? Is it to say, we do not have appropriate, consequences, based on actions? that basically our sense of community and what people can say, on social media and threatening things like death and making kind of negative comments is now becoming the norm in our community. What was the intention? I don't, that's what I don't understand.
Yeah, I think if you listen to more of the podcast, she talks about the intention, I think, is to try and reclaim some of her power, her agency, if you will, because I think she feels like that's been taken from her. But to me, the other thing that rang hollow about the apology is she never once mentions the other man's wife, not once showing some empathy for saying, yeah, we were both separated, but I also realized how much getting caught on Coldplay's Cold Cam hurt this other man's wife and the family. Never once mentioned that. And to me, that's where it fails.
But that's interesting, Justin, because I even remember this from college, when we knew of people who cheated on their girlfriends or boyfriends, and people were always blaming the other woman. And, yes, you could say she has a moral compass. She has kind of, ethical boundaries, and that this did hurt another woman. What I think is interesting is when you're saying that is that she doesn't necessarily owe that bond. She doesn't necessarily have that connection and commitment. She didn't take the vows with that woman. That, I think, to be completely honest, really rests with the man.
Well, this is so interesting. Oh, okay. I was like, this is not the feminist Katy Montgomery I know. And there we did the full circle. Right now I
think about it, right? Yes, generally, if you have a strong moral compass, you're not going to, cheat. You won't be engaged with people who are otherwise, engaged with someone else. But at the end of the day, that's his relationship. He is the one who has made the commitment. He's the one who's broken the vow. So why is she being held to that standard and he's not?
Okay. Well, I think that's very fair to respond to me, because I do think you're right. I automatically want to hate her because she's the one that did this. Having said that, I still think they both owe that woman an apology. They both owe her husband an apology. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah. And to be completely honest, there's children involved here too, and it's, and that's really heartbreaking for these children, is that you're seeing the dissolution of your parents' marriage and, and you're seeing that chaos, but then you're having to go to school and to work and to your after school activities, and everyone knows your family business, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this level of shame around it. So I think there's a big apology to their children. But I also think the question here is, was it the wrong way forward to have a public apology? How much does it mean when you are not a, public figure, and neither one of these people are considered public figures? Was this the appropriate way to apologize, or would that have been a lovely, thoughtful note, handwritten letter note to, his wife? Would that have been sitting down the children and saying, this was inappropriate. I am sorry that you become, an object of kind of hatred and shame. I apologize. This is not the behavior that I hope, that is a standard and that I have, set for all of you. Is this appropriate to go on to Oprah? That's my question.
Well, I totally agree. You automatically doubt the woman's motives by 6 months later. If she had done this 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, I think if you would have involved a PR crisis team, they would have said, get out there and get in front of it. She is way behind it. So all, like you said, she is doing is reigniting the dragon. And here we are talking about it.
It is. And let's be honest. The New York Times article comes out. Oprah and her producers are reading it. They're probably calling her. They're in negotiations. They're going back and forth. Again, this is not just driven by this woman, but this is driven by our thirst for salacious news, for feeding the dragon, for Oprah trying to be like, I've got the exclusive. video. Right. And so, everybody's, intentions are a little muddled here, right? They're not all honest and pure.
100%. And if you remember when we covered this the initial time, I have a friend who lives in the high-tech startup world. She is a high-powered executive in that world. And I don't know if you remember me saying this. She knew the man the other man. She had been at a conference with him, and he made moves on her, allegedly. And so when she saw him on the Coldplay Kiss Cam, she's like, oh my gosh, that's so-and-so. And that immediately resonated with her. I remember at the conference. So this guy obviously, or at least some women would claim that he's a big horn dog. So there you go. There's feminist Justin throwing it all on him.
There's your technical term. But again, to get back to, we're talking about what is the wrong way forward with apologies. And moving to another perfect example, which is based on the slap heard around the world, is when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars. And this was a few years ago. But this still, to me, is the prime example of the wrong way forward when apologizing. So, first of all, he did not apologize in real time.
Well, let's take it up on the other side. We're at the end of our break, or end of our first segment. So we'll take that up on the other side. We'll be back right after this.
Great.
You've been listening to Wrong Way Forward, where bad advice goes to die and then gets resurrected just so we can roast it again.
If you're enjoying the chaos, hit like and subscribe and come back every Thursday for new episodes.
Have a new topic or some disastrously bad advice you want to dissect? Email wrongwayforwardpodcast@gmail.com. Include your contact info.
Now back to Wrong Way Forward.
Roasting the worst advice ever. Welcome back to the Katy and Justin podcast.
Here we are. We're back here on Wrong Way Forward this week. Katy and I are chatting offline about our technology issues. So, Katy, when we left, you were talking about Will Smith.
Yes, probably the worst wrong way forward apology of all time. So, everybody's pretty familiar with this. At the Oscars a few years ago, Will Smith slapped Chris Rock in front of everyone.
Let me just take you back that moment. I, of course, go to bed early, but I watch TV on my phone without my context. So my phone is literally like this. And so I was in bed and I was like, what? So I immediately text down or call down Josh. I'm like, are you watching this? So I actually got out of bed. It's been one of 3 times in history that I actually got out of bed and came back down to discuss this.
And it was, most of the audience, everyone was just aghast. I mean, people were frozen. Did
you watch it?
I did. I watched it, and let me tell you, I've never been a massive Will Smith fan, but I love me some Chris Rock. I've seen him live. I watch every show. I think he is just brilliant. And I'm like, first of all, just in a pissing match between those two, I would hands over choose Chris Rock. But Will Smith's behavior was violent, inappropriate, unprofessional. He wasn't able to get a hold of his emotions. But what's interesting is let's talk about the actual apology. Mm-hmm. So first of all, it was 4 months later. So it wasn't timely. Number 2, it was done by YouTube video. So I think that's very kind of self-aggrandizing. I'm very important. And I want to read to you the exact language. Chris, I apologize to you. My behavior was unacceptable, and I am here whenever you are ready to talk. And, first of all, I appreciate the apology. But what I think is interesting is he left it kind of in Chris Rock's court. The ball is now in his court. And, and that is putting the onus and burden on him, mm-hmm. but also it's changing the discussion. And so then what happens? Everybody, the media, the little community, the culture goes after Chris Rock and it's like, what do you think? And so it's no longer about the apology. It's kind of shifting the burden. I found that to be one of the worst apologies of all time. And I think it helps give us some, kind of examples of what we should and should not do. And I was reading an article in Harvard Health, and I thought this was really interesting. They say to have a true, genuine apology, you need to let go of concerns about right and wrong. And it's trying to understand the other person's experience. And so what I think is so interesting is that's one of the hardest things to do, is to let go of concerns about right or wrong. And the idea is that you really should validate the other person's emotions, and then you promise to make amends. So what I keep hearing about is I am sorry you were offended. Mm-hmm. Right. I am sorry that, that this didn't land well on you. I'm sorry that you don't understand. That to me is still holding on to concerns of right or wrong. That is, I'm right, but I will acknowledge your emotion. And I do not think that is a sufficient apology.
So basically, in order for you to have an efficient apology, you've got to basically let go of that. And it's just,
I think so.
Yeah.
And then you need to promise to make amends. And I think that's what we're not seeing a lot.
What does that mean?
Right?
Because that I recoil at that immediately. I mean, I am a big apologist. I think if I've learned anything in 53 years, it's the biggest growth thing I've had is that I've learned how to apologize. And but I don't know that I would be like, let me make this right. I don't know that. I think that's like an extra. That's like a cherry on top of the apology, and I don't think I need that.
All right, we're talking about what's the what is the really the way to apologize. So here would be an example, Justin, and we've talked about this on this podcast. Is when you posted that heinous picture of me looking all roly poly on the couch wearing workout clothes.
That was like episode 7, people, for our first professional fight. If you're keeping track.
Yes, on social media, and you said, I apologize. The amends would be, Katy, I will no longer in the future post pictures of you without your permission. Or if something falls into these following categories, I will know that it is not safe to post, right? It is showing the lesson learned, and it's showing in the future, I'm going to build trust.
Okay. I thought it was more like reparations. I will not post this picture, and I'm going to buy you dinner next week.
That sounds like a plan.
Or I'm going to use AI and regenerate this picture in a way that's flattering. Right?
Yes. I mean, like in a ball gown. Yes. So, but they say the other thing is it's the big part of apology is no evading, blaming, making excuses, or dredging up offenses from the past. So the idea is you don't want to rationalize your behavior. You want to own it. And then the big thing here is you want to restore trust. Usually when you're having to apologize, that kind of chain, that link of trust is broken. And so if you don't look at it as right or wrong, and instead you kind of really own the behavior and you don't try to rationalize it, and you say that you're going to do better in the future, that is the way to rebuild trust. And that is why apologies are necessary. And that's why good ones, actually go through those steps. Because if not, you're not rebuilding the trust. And if you don't rebuild the trust, then we start to read into everything. Right? Yeah. Again, going back to our brains are clever and do you no favors.
100%. And I always think apologies are a muscle that you have to exercise. Do you know what I mean? Like if you do it often, and we all have reasons to apologize probably in our everyday life, they really get easier. I mean, when Josh and I have a fight, I really do take a moment at every fight and I say, is this fight worth it? Am I wrong? And if I'm wrong, I'm jumping on an apology in 2 seconds. Like, you know what? This is not worth fighting, and I'm wrong here.
Well, and that's very emotionally, I think, mature.
That's one of my few emotionally mature qualities. There
you go. Well, own that, Justin. And I thought this was really interesting. There is a book by kind of it's called Dr. Lerner. Isn't that interesting? His last name's Lerner. But Why You Don't Apologize. And it said, there's this quote that I thought was really beautiful. If only our passion to understand others were as great as our passion to be understood. Were this so, all of our apologies would be truly meaningful and healing.
I love that.
And so this goes back to kind of empathy. You're trying to understand why the other person's hurt, not why you should be understood for having done that. And I think that really is emotionally mature, and being able to step outside of it and really understand how it impacted the other person.
Yeah,
and I think Will Smith, in his apology, again, just, beating the dead horse on this is wrong way forward, is, he came off as self-serving. He wanted to be understood as someone who apologized and was taking responsibility, rather than, how did that land on, literally, physically, and literally, how did that land on Chris Rock? That was humiliating, that was embarrassing, that was emasculating. It really took away, a sense of power, and really trying to understand what it was like to be in his shoes. And it failed miserably. And so my guess would be is that Will Smith has not restored trust with Chris Rock.
And the apology was flat.
Never be trust again.
100%. I also think it's about stakes. The higher the stakes, the apology has to follow that. And so, like, you look at not only Will Smith, I mean, the stakes for him were so big for that apology. And so the apology had to rise up, and it didn't meet that stakes because his career's on the line. Same with this woman. 6 months later, why is she doing this? Because the stakes are big. She obviously has not got what she wanted wherever she is in her life. And so she's having to come back and now do a public apology to her. So I do think there's an issue of how the stakes go with it. On the other side, let's talk about, is it ever okay not to accept an apology? We'll talk about that when we come back on Wrong Way Forward. Thanks for streaming Wrong Way Forward, the weekly reminder that advice is usually free for a reason. We call out bad advice wherever it hides: boardrooms, break rooms, and even book clubs.
Enjoying this dumpster fire? Like, subscribe, and check back every Thursday for new episodes. Want us to roast your favorite piece of nonsense? Email us at wrongwayforwardpodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to include your contact info. We're not psychic, just judgmental. And now, back to Wrong Way Forward.
Roasting the worst advice ever. Welcome back to the Katy and Justin.
And we're back. And Justin teased, we've been talking about what is the wrong way forward and potentially the right way forward to apologize. When is it acceptable to not accept an apology? So Justin, when I posed that question to you, is there ever a time when you should not accept an apology?
I don't know that I've ever been in a position where I have not accepted an apology. I think for me, because I have been through some big things in my life, family stuff and other stuff where the stakes were so high that, it really had an emotional or a physical and an emotional impact on me not to accept apologies or not to give an apology. And so, I think if you read the research, it says stuff like if the apology is not genuine or if there's not a change of behavior, there are circumstances where you may not want to apologize. But I'm a big fan of accepting it, and then that person doesn't have to be in your life, but you can still accept it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think that's interesting. Like, what does the word acceptance mean? Is that as simple as I accept your apology, or is acceptance really accepting it? Like building back the trust, understanding that person, is contrite. Like, what does acceptance mean?
Yeah, but I think that if you get into a situation where there is an apology needed and it's a serious apology, you're always going to have that in the back of your mind, right? And so you can accept the apology, but you do have to have the conversation. Is this a person who could hurt me again? Would this person hurt me again, which goes back to your thing on trust. I think if it's some core belief in you feel like this person could do that again or would hurt you again, then you can accept the apology and then just move on without them.
Yeah, I think I disagree. I think that there are some situations where there needs to be a very strong boundary. And and I also think that it is a little bit disingenuous to accept an apology if you aren't truly in an acceptance mode. And I think that there could be times when, that exists. Kind of going back to previous episodes we've had is I a lot of times see this is when ghosting can happen.
Yeah, that's me.
And I don't see myself as a kind of frequent ghoster, but I know when my mother passed away, and it was a shock. She was on a morning walk and was killed by a driver under the influence. He hit her body with his car. There were people who really stepped up, and I really, my dad, I remember saying, like, you and your siblings have some amazing people in your life. Like, it was one of the things he was most proud of, is kind of seeing that community come around. But there were some people who just didn't show up. And, and I had one particular friend, and a very close friend, and we are still close. But I just was so upset with him and how he showed up at that time that I just kept ignoring him. And finally, what I appreciate is that he really persevered with the apology and said, Katy, we have to get together and we have to talk about this, because if we don't get past this, it's going to continue to fester and we'll never repair the trust. But I found that sometimes I was just making decisions where I'm like, I've got this fantastic group of people around me. I don't need to be engaging and spending time with people who, and there's an exception to people who didn't have the ability to show up. But people who did not kind of show up for me, I'm like, you know what, I've got enough friends. And so, I don't think that's the mature way, but I think you can see that a lot of times where it's like, it's just avoidance because it's so uncomfortable because you're not ready to accept the apology. And so it just fizzles out.
Interesting. So you're basically saying, you're saying if you can't forgive and forget, then you're not really ready to accept the apology.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, kind of going back to this, is that you have to let go of concerns of right and wrong when you apologize. My guess is the same for accepting the apology, right? Like, if you are so stuck that it's like, I am right and you are wrong, you probably can't accept it.
100%. I think that also brings up another good episode is on boundaries. You called it ghosting. You called it boundaries. I do call it ghosting. Isn't that the same thing? We'll talk about that on a future episode.
Boundaries are tough. Boundaries are tough. So that could be multiple episodes.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a word I just learned in my late 40s, 50s. It's almost overused, but anyway, that's a future episode. Well, that's this week's episode of Wrong Way Forward. If you like our show, please comment. Of course, you can always call or text our tip line at 720-251-4450. Katy, why don't you give our handles and take us out?
Yeah, and you can also send us an email. We love to hear from you at wrongwayforwardpodcast@gmail.com. And you can also engage with us on social media. We're on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. And we'd love to hear what you have to say on our YouTube channel where you can see us live. We always love chatting with y'all. And here's us signing off from The Wrong Way Forward.
All right, that's a wrap on this week's episode of Wrong Way Forward. Remember, the only thing worse than taking bad advice is giving it.
If you've liked what you've heard, like, subscribe, or follow us wherever you stream podcasts. And if you've got a topic or need some advice we'll probably regret giving, email us at wrongwayforwardpodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Wrong Way Forward.